Aha, another one. Had you seen him before?
No, monsieur.
Ah. Do you think you would recognize him if you saw him?
I think so, monsieur.
Poirot murmured something in Monsieur Bouc's ear. The latter got up and went to the door to give an order. Poirot was continuing his questions in an easy, friendly manner. Have you ever been to America, Frau Schmidt?
Never, monsieur. It must be a fine country.
You have heard, perhaps, of who this man who was killed really was? That he was responsible for the death of a little child?
Yes, I have heard, monsieur. It was abominable, wicked. The good God should not allow such things. We are not so wicked as that in Germany.
Tears had come into the woman's eyes. Her strong, motherly soul was moved. It was an abominable crime, said Poirot gravely. He drew a scrap of cambric from his pocket and handed it to her. Is this your handkerchief, Frau Schmidt? There was a moment's silence as the woman examined it. She looked up after a minute. The colour had mounted a little in her face.
No, indeed, it is not mine, monsieur.
It has the initial H, you see. That is why I thought it was yours.
Monsieur, it is a lady's handkerchief, that. A very expensive handkerchief, embroidered by hand. It comes from Paris, I should say.
It is not yours, and you do not know whose it is?
Oh, no, monsieur.
Of the three listening, only Poirot caught the nuance of hesitation in the reply. Monsieur Bouc whispered in his ear. Poirot nodded and said to the woman, The 3 sleeping car attendants are coming in. Will you be so kind as to tell me which is the one you met last night as you were going with the rug to the princess? The 3 men entered. Pierre Michel, the big blonde conductor of the Athens-Paris coach, and the stout burly conductor of the Bucharest one. Hildegard Schmidt looked at them and immediately shook her head.
No, monsieur,
she said.
None of these is the man I saw last night.
But these are the only conductors on the train. You must be mistaken.
I am quite sure, monsieur. These are all tall, big men. The one I saw was small and dark. He had a little moustache. His voice, when he said pardon, was weak, like a woman's. Indeed, I remember him very well, monsieur.
Chapter 13. Summary of the passenger's evidence.
A small, dark man with a womanish voice,
said Monsieur Bouc. The 3 conductors and Hildegard Schmidt had been dismissed.
But I understand nothing of all this. The enemy that this wretched spoke of, he was then on the train after all. But where is he now? How can he have vanished into thin air? My head, it whirls. Say something then, my friend, I implore you. Show me how the impossible can be possible.
It is a good phrase, that, said Poirot. The impossible cannot have happened. Therefore, the impossible must be possible in spite of appearances.
Explain to me then, quickly, what actually happened on the train last night.
I am not a magician, mon cher. I am, like you, a very puzzled man. This affair advances in a very strange manner.
It does not advance at all. It stays where it was.
Poirot shook his head. No, that is not true. We are more advanced. We know certain things. We have heard the evidence of the passengers.
And what has that told us? Nothing at all.
I would not say that, my friend.
I exaggerate, perhaps. The American hardman and the German maid, yes, they have added something to our knowledge. That is to say, they have made the whole business more unintelligible than it was.
No, said Poirot soothingly. Monsieur Bouc turned upon him.
Speak, then. Let us hear the wisdom of Hercule Poirot.
Did I not tell you that I was, like you, a very puzzled man? But at least we can face our problem. We can arrange such facts as we have with order and method.
Pray continue, monsieur, said Dr. Constantine.
Poirot cleared his throat and straightened a piece of blotting paper. Let us review the case as it stands at this moment. First, there are certain indisputable facts. This man, Ratchet or Cassetti, was stabbed in 12 places and died last night. That is fact one.
I grant it to you. I grant it, monsieur, said Monsieur Bouc with a gesture of irony.
Hercule Poirot was not at all put out. He continued calmly. I will pass over for the moment certain rather peculiar appearances which Dr. Constantine and I have already discussed together. I will come to them presently. The next fact of importance, to my mind, is the time of the crime.
That, again, is one of the few things we do know, said Monsieur Bouc. The crime was committed at 1:15 this morning. Everything goes to show that was so.
Not everything. You exaggerate. There is certainly a fair amount of evidence to support that view.
I am glad you admit that, at least.
Poirot went on calmly, unperturbed by the interruption. We have before us 3 possibilities. 1, that the crime was committed, as you say, at 1:15. This is supported by the evidence of the German woman Hildegard Schmidt. It agrees with the evidence of Dr. Constantine. Possibility 2. The crime was committed later, and the evidence of the watch was deliberately faked. Possibility 3. The crime was committed earlier, and the evidence faked for the same reason as above. Now, if we accept possibility 1 as the most likely to have occurred, and the one supported by most evidence, we must also accept certain facts arising from it. To begin with, if the crime was committed at 1:15, the murderer cannot have left the train, and the question arises, where is he and who is he? To begin with, let us examine the evidence carefully. We first hear of the existence of this man, the small, dark man with a womanish voice, from the man Hardman. He says that Ratchet told him of this person and employed him to watch out for the man. There is no evidence to support this. We have only Hardman's word for it. Let us next examine the question, is Hardman the person he pretends to be, an operative of a New York detective agency? What, to my mind, is so interesting in this case is that we have none of the facilities afforded to the police. We cannot investigate the bona fides of any of these people. We have to rely solely on deduction. That, to me, makes the matter very much more interesting. There is no routine work. It is a matter of the intellect. I ask myself, can we accept Hardman's account of himself? I make my decision and I answer, yes. I am of the opinion that we can accept Hardman's account of himself.
You rely on the intuition, what the Americans call the hunch, said Dr. Constantine.
Not at all. I regard the probabilities. Hardman is traveling with a false passport that will at once make him an object of suspicion. The first thing that the police will do when they do arrive upon the scene is to detain Hardman and cable as to whether his account of himself is true. In the case of many of the passengers, to establish their bona fides will be difficult. In most cases, it will probably not be attempted, especially since there seems nothing in the way of suspicion attaching to them. But in Hardman's case, it is simple. Either he is the person he represents himself to be, or he is not. Therefore, I say that all will prove to be in order.
You acquit him of suspicion?
Not at all. You misunderstand me. For all I know, any American detective might have his own private reasons for wishing to murder Ratchet. No. What I am saying is that I think we can accept Hardman's own account of himself. This story, then, that he tells of Ratchet seeking him out and employing him is not unlikely and is most probably, though not, of course, certainly true. If we are going to accept it as true, we must see if there is any confirmation of it. We find it in rather an unlikely place.
in the evidence of Hildegard Schmidt. Her description of the man she saw in wagon lit uniform tallies exactly. Is there any further confirmation of these two stories? There is. There is the button, found in her compartment by Mrs. Hubbard. And there is also another corroborating statement which you may not have noticed.
What is that?
The fact that both Colonel Arbuthnot and Hector McQueen mentioned that the conductor passed their carriage. They attached no importance to the fact, but Monsieur Pierre Michel has declared that he did not leave his seat except on certain specified occasions, none of which would take him down to the far end of the coach past the compartment in which Arbuthnot and McQueen were sitting. Therefore, this story, the story of a small, dark man with a womanish voice dressed in wagon lit uniform, rests on the testimony, direct or indirect, of 4 witnesses.
One small point, said Dr. Constantine. If Hildegard Schmidt's story is true, how is it that the real conductor did not mention having seen her when he came to answer Mrs. Hubbard's bell?
That is explained, I think. When he arrived to answer Mrs. Hubbard, the maid was in with her mistress. When she finally returned to her own compartment, the conductor was in with Mrs. Hubbard.
Monsieur Bouc had been waiting with difficulty until they had finished.
Yes, my friend,
he said impatiently to Poirot.
But whilst I admire your caution, your method of advancing a step at a time, I submit that you have not yet touched the point at issue. We are all agreed that this person exists. The point is, where did he go?
Poirot shook his head reprovingly.
You are in error. You are inclined to put the cart before the horse. Before I ask myself, where did this man vanish to? I ask myself, did such a man really exist? Because you see, if the man were an invention, a fabrication, how much easier to make him disappear. So I try to establish first that there really is such a flesh and blood person.
And having arrived at the fact that there is, eh bien, where is he now?
There are only 2 answers to that, mon cher. Either he is still hidden on the train in a place of such extraordinary ingenuity that we cannot even think of it, or else he is, as one might say, 2 persons. That is, he is both himself, the man feared by Monsieur Ratchet, and a passenger on the train so well disguised that Monsieur Ratchet did not recognize him.
It is an idea,
that, said Monsieur Bouc, his face lighting up. Then it clouded over again. But there is one objection. Poirot took the words out of his mouth.
The height of the man. It is that you would say? With the exception of Monsieur Ratchet's valet, all the passengers are big men, the Italian, Colonel Arbuthnot, Hector McQueen, Count Andrigny. Well, that leaves us the valet. Not a very likely supposition. But there is another possibility. Remember the womanish voice. That gives us a choice of alternatives. The man may be disguised as a woman, or, alternatively, he may actually be a woman. A tall woman dressed in man's clothes would look small.
But surely Ratchet would have known.
Perhaps he did know. Perhaps already this woman had attempted his life wearing men's clothes the better to accomplish her purpose. Ratchet may have guessed that she would use the same trick again, so he tells Hardman to look for a man. But he mentions, however, a womanish voice.
It is a possibility, said Monsieur Bouc,
but... Listen, my friend. I think that I should tell you now of certain inconsistencies noticed by Dr. Constantine.
He retailed at length the conclusions that he and the doctor had arrived at together from the nature of the dead man's wounds. Monsieur Bouc groaned and held his head again.
I know, said Poirot sympathetically. I know exactly how you feel. The head spins, does it not?
The whole thing is a fantasy,
cried Monsieur Bouc. Exactly. It is absurd, improbable, it cannot be. So I myself have said, and yet, my friend, there it is. One cannot escape from the facts.
It is madness.
Is it not? It is so mad, my friend, that sometimes I am haunted by the sensation that really it must be very simple. But that is only one of my little ideas.
2 murders, groaned Monsieur Bouc, and on the Orient Express.
The thought almost made him weep.
And now, let us make the fantasy more fantastic, said Poirot cheerfully. Last night on the train there are 2 mysterious strangers. There is the wagon-lit attendant answering to the description given us by Monsieur Hardman and seen by Hildegard Schmidt, Colonel Arbuthnot, and Monsieur McQueen. There is also a woman in a red kimono, a tall, slim woman, seen by Pierre Michel, by Miss Debenham, by Monsieur McQueen, and by myself, and smelt, I may say, by Colonel Arbuthnot. Who was she? No one on the train admits to having a scarlet kimono. She too has vanished. Was she one and the same with the spurious wagon-lit attendant, or was she some quite distinct personality? Where are they, these 2? And, incidentally, where is the wagon-lit uniform and the scarlet kimono?
Ah, that is something definite.
Monsieur Bouc sprang up eagerly.
We must search all the passengers' luggage. Yes, that will be something.
Poirot rose also.
I will make a prophecy, he said.
You know where they are?
I have a little idea.
Where, then?
You will find the scarlet kimono in the baggage of one of the men, and you will find the uniform of the wagon-lit conductor in the baggage of Hildegard Schmidt.
Hildegard Schmidt, you think?
Not what you are thinking. I will put it like this. If Hildegard Schmidt is guilty, the uniform might be found in her baggage, but if she is innocent, it certainly will be.
But how?
Began Monsieur Bouc and stopped.
What is this noise that approaches?
He cried.
It resembles a locomotive in motion.
The noise drew nearer. It consisted of shrill cries and protests in a woman's voice. The door at the end of the dining car flew open. Mrs. Hubbard burst in.
It's too horrible, she cried. It's just too horrible. In my sponge bag, a great knife, all over blood.
And suddenly, toppling forward, she fainted heavily on Monsieur Bouc's shoulder. Chapter 14. The Evidence of the Weapon. With more vigour than chivalry, Monsieur Bouc deposited the fainting lady with her head on the table. Dr. Constantine yelled for one of the restaurant attendants who came at a run.
Keep her head so, said the doctor. If she revives, give her a little cognac, you understand?
Then he hurried off after the other 2. His interest lay wholly in the crime. Swooning middle-aged ladies did not interest him at all. It is possible that Mrs. Hubbard revived rather quicker with these methods than she might otherwise have done. A few minutes later she was sitting up, sipping cognac from a glass proffered by the attendant, and talking once more.
I just can't say how terrible it was. I don't suppose anybody on this train can understand my feelings. I've always been very, very sensitive ever since a child. The mere sight of blood, oh, why, even now I come over queer when I think about it.
The attendant proffered the glass again.
Encore un peu, madame?
Do you think I'd better? I'm a lifelong teetotaler. I just never touch spirits or wine at any time. All my family are abstainers. Still, perhaps as this is only medical.
She sipped once more. In the meantime, Poirot and Monsieur Bouc, closely followed by Dr. Constantine, had hurried out of the restaurant car and along the corridor of the Istanbul coach towards Mrs. Hubbard's compartment. Every traveller on the train seemed to be congregated outside the door. The conductor, a harassed look on his face, was keeping them back.
Mais il n'y a rien à voir,
he said, and repeated the sentiment in several other languages.
Let me pass, if you please,
said Monsieur Bouc. Squeezing his rotundity past the obstructing passengers, he entered the compartment, Poirot close behind him.
I am glad you have come, monsieur, said the conductor with a sigh of relief. Everyone has been trying to enter. The American lady, such screams as she gave, ma foi. I thought she too had been murdered. I came at a run, and there she was, screaming like a mad woman, and she cried out that she must fetch you, and she departed, screeching at the top of her voice, and telling everybody whose carriage she passed what had occurred.
He added with a gesture of the hand,
It is in there, monsieur. I have not touched it.
Hanging on the handle of the door that gave access to the next compartment was a large-sized checked rubber sponge bag. Below it on the floor, just where it had fallen from Mrs. Hubbard's hand, was a straight-bladed dagger, a cheap affair, sham oriental, with an embossed hilt and a tapering blade. The blade was stained with patches of what looked like rust. Poirot picked it up delicately. "Yes," he murmured, "there is no mistake. Here is our missing weapon, all right, eh, Doctor?" The doctor examined it. "You need not be so careful," said Poirot. "There will be no fingerprints on it save those of Mrs. Hubbard." Constantine's examination did not take long. "It is the weapon, all right," he said. "It would account for any of the wounds." "I implore you, my friend, do not say that." The doctor looked astonished. "Already we are heavily overburdened by coincidence. 2 people decide to stab Monsieur Ratchet last night. It is too much of a good thing that each of them should select an identical weapon." "As to that, the coincidence is not, perhaps, so great as it seems," said the doctor. "Thousands of these sham Eastern daggers are made and shipped to the bazaars of Constantinople." "You console me a little, but only a little," said Poirot. He looked thoughtfully at the door in front of him, then, lifting off the sponge bag, he tried the handle. The door did not budge. About a foot above the handle was the door bolt. Poirot drew it back and tried again, but still the door remained fast. "We locked it from the other side, you remember," said the doctor. "That is true," said Poirot absently. He seemed to be thinking about something else. His brow was furrowed as though in perplexity.
"It agrees, does it not?" said Monsieur Bouc. "The man passes through this carriage. As he shuts the communicating door behind him, he feels the sponge bag. A thought comes to him, and he quickly slips the blood-stained knife inside. Then, all unwitting that he has awakened Mrs. Hubbard, he slips out through the other door into the corridor."
"As you say," murmured Poirot. "That is how it must have happened." But the puzzled look did not leave his face.
"But what is it?"
demanded Monsieur Bouc.
"There is something, is there not, that does not satisfy you?"
Poirot darted a quick look at him. "The same point does not strike you?" "No, evidently not." "Well, it is a small matter." The conductor looked into the carriage.
"The American lady is coming back."
Dr. Constantine looked rather guilty. He had, he felt, treated Mrs. Hubbard rather cavalierly, but she had no reproaches for him. Her energies were concentrated on another matter.
"I'm just going to say one thing right out," she said breathlessly as she arrived in the doorway. "I'm not going on any longer in this compartment. Why, I wouldn't sleep in it tonight if you paid me $1 million.
"But, madame—"
"I know what you're going to say, and I'm telling you right now that I won't do any such thing. Why, I'd rather sit up all night in the corridor."
She began to cry.
"Oh, if my daughter could only know. If she could see me now, why—"
Poirot interrupted firmly. "You misunderstand, madame. Your demand is most reasonable. Your baggage shall be changed at once to another compartment." Mrs. Hubbard lowered her handkerchief.
"Is that so? Oh, I feel better right away. But surely it's all full up, unless one of the gentlemen—"
Monsieur Bouc spoke.
"Your baggage, madame, shall be moved out of this coach altogether. You shall have a compartment in the next coach, which was put on at Belgrade." "Why, that's splendid. I'm not an out-of-the-way nervous woman, but to sleep in that compartment next door to a dead man—" She shivered. "It would drive me plumb crazy." "Michel," called Monsieur Bouc, "move this baggage into a vacant compartment in the Athens-Paris coach."
"Yes, monsieur. The same one as this, the number 3?
"No," said Poirot before his friend could reply. "I think it would be better for madame to have a different number altogether. The number 12, for instance."
"Bien, monsieur."
The conductor seized the luggage. Mrs. Hubbard turned gratefully to Poirot.
"That's very kind and delicate of you. I appreciate it, I assure you."
"Do not mention it, madame. We will come with you and see you comfortably installed." Mrs. Hubbard was escorted by the 3 men to her new home. She looked round her happily.
"This is fine."
"It suits you, madame?"
It is, you see, exactly like the compartment you have left. That's so, only it faces the other way. But that doesn't matter, for these trains go first one way and then the other. I said to my daughter, I want a carriage facing the engine, and she said, why, Mama, that'll be no good to you, for if you go to sleep one way, when you wake up, the trains go in the other. And it was quite true what she said. Why, last evening we went into Belgrade one way and out the other. At any rate, Madame, you are quite happy and contented now? Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Here we are, stuck in a snowdrift, and nobody doing anything about it, and my boat sailing the day after tomorrow.
Madame, said Monsieur Bouc, we are all in the same case, every one of us.
Well, that's true, admitted Mrs. Hubbard. But nobody else has had a murderer walking right through their compartment in the middle of the night. What still puzzles me, Madame, said Poirot, is how the man got into your compartment. If the communicating door was bolted, as you say, you are sure that it was bolted? Why, the Swedish lady tried it before my eyes.